Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the Program Manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. Today's webinar topic is an update on the recycled plastics commodities markets. Our presenter today is Kate Eagles, who I will introduce in a moment. Following her presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A feature box located on your control panel on your screen. You may also use the chat feature to request assistance if you're experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and PA Recycling Market Center websites. And also please note that Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, its affiliates, funders, and the National Recycling Coalition assume no liability resulting from the use of any information provided during this webinar. This webinar is only provided as an informational tool and no discrimination is intended and no endorsement by these organizations is applied. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Kate Eagles serves as Program Director for the Association of Plastics Recyclers, also known as APR, which is the International Trade Association representing the plastics industry. Her focus includes addressing container and component designs that adversely impact the U.S. plastic recycling stream as defined through the APR Design Guide for Plastic Recyclability, Recycled Plastics, Market Development, and Recycled Material Collection and Market Analysis. Kate has worked in plastics recycling since 2005, including 10 years at the Plastic Recycling Consultancy, More Recycling Associates. During this time, she served in various management and communication roles for the National Association for PET Container Resources, also known as NAPCOR, which is the trade association for the PET plastic packaging industry in North America. Specific focus areas include the recycled PET supply chain, the domestic PET reclamation industry, recycled plastic material markets, and related analysis and reporting. Before making the move to plastic recycling, Kate worked in a variety of food and beverage, marketing, and public relations roles. She brings this communications interest to her work in plastics recycling with articles published in Resource Recycling, Recycling Today, and SPE Thermoform quarterly magazines. And Kate lives and works in Northern California. So I'm going to turn the program over to Kate.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And thanks to the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center and the National Recycling Coalition for having me today. As Wayne mentioned, I am Program Director for the APR, so I wear various hats. I'm going to jump right in here. We have a varied audience, so I'm going to cover sort of a lot of different ground and definitely save room for some questions at the end. Basically, I'm going to introduce the APR and talk a little bit about recycling volumes of plastics collected for recycling in the US and their end markets, a little bit on markets and MRF experiences at the moment, and then I'll talk a little bit again about a couple of APR projects. So let's get started here. So as Wayne mentioned, APR is the International Trade Association, the voice of plastics recycling, representing the plastics industry. We are the only trade organization exclusively dedicated to plastics recycling. We represent companies that acquire, reprocess, and sell the output of more than 90% of the post-consumer processing capacity in North America, and our membership is varied. Our membership includes recycling companies of all sizes, processing numerous resins, as well as consumer product companies, equipment manufacturers, test labs, other organizations committed to the success of plastics recycling. Primary goals, I'll leave them to speak for themselves there. And our membership, as mentioned, is varied. Here is a sampling of some of our members. Just a quick comment in case for those of you who may not know, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, we also purchased the Plastics Recycling Conference and Trade Show and its sister conferences, Resource Recycling and eScrap, and the publications as well. So those are under the APR umbrella. They operate separately or independently, I should say, but they're under the broader APR umbrella. So I'm going to go into sort of what's happening with plastics recycling in terms of what's the collection volume. So I think and the end markets for the plastic recycled material in the United States, because I think it sets us up for some good context for talking about markets and what's happening in the marketplace right now. I'm going to start with bottle production, post-consumer recycling 2018. So when we talk about recycled bottles, we're mainly talking, although not exclusively, we're mainly talking about PET and high density polyethylene bottles. You can see that in the production chart on the right, and compare that to the recycling chart, I'm sorry, on the production chart on the left, the recycling chart sort of in the center there, you can see that the production volumes by percentage loosely are followed in the recycling volumes. In other words, PET is dominant with HDPE as the next largest segment, followed by a little bit of polypropylene and other. Again, this is bottles only. We're going to talk about non-bottled post-consumer as well. So if you look at volumes here, you have about 1,813 million pounds of PET collected for about just under a 29% recycling rate in 2018. For HDPE natural and pigmented, we've broken out the volumes there, but if you combine them, you have a little over 1 billion pounds collected, just over a 30% recycling rate. So the data I'm using here is from the most recent public reports. For the most part, that's 2018, although for the non-bottle rigids, that would be 2017. Same for the film. Those reports, I believe, that the newest reports, which would be 2018, should be out shortly. Okay, so we have that for bottle collection. Looking over time at what's happened with post-consumer bottle collection in the US, we're only talking US, although I'll talk about exports in a few minutes. There is export material reflected in these numbers. But if you look at the trend is up, but you can see it's flattening the last few years. This chart is from the report. It does not break it out by resin. But if you combine the PET volumes I just mentioned and the high density volumes, you're really looking at about 98% and change of the bottles collected for recycling, the balance being a polypropylene. So you're looking at the combined 2.8 billion pounds of the 2.85 billion total. So mostly we're talking those two resins. A little bit about end markets, because again, I think it's kind of interesting if you look at what's happening with the markets. So for high density polyethylene, the largest end markets there are pipe and non-food bottles. For PET, fiber is the orange there, the big piece of the pie. And for PET is polyester. So for fiber in this context, for PET, we mean carpet, we mean a fiber fill, we mean other kinds of polyester fiber end uses and market uses. If you combine the packaging on the PET end markets, if you combine the sheet and film, the food and beverage and non-food bottles, you get about 44% of that pie. So the biggest players there for end markets are the fiber and the packaging, and then the strapping would be the third largest there. Let's talk a little bit about non-bottle rigid plastics. So again, post-consumer recycled materials. So if you look at non-bottle rigid plastics, again, this is 2017 data, the most recent available. You can see that where the arrow is pointing, that the significant volumes for non-bottle rigids come from high density polyethylene and polypropylene. You can see that they're at the respective 40 and 36%, and you can see where the balance comes from as well. This is generally, the non-bottle rigids have generally trended up over the last couple of years. It'll be interesting to see what's happening in 2018. We have sort of a slight decline in 2017. So it'll be interesting to see the new numbers to see how that's tracking. So this is kind of, I focus on this because I think we've seen a couple things here. If you look at the pie chart, you can see that most of this material that is collected for recycling is segregated by resin. In the United States, it's more valuable to have it resin segregated. I think you can see that most of that material that is collected for recycling is resin segregated. There is some mixed resin rigid bales, as you'll see, but I think the market skews towards segregated resins. Export purchase is declining, and I'll talk a little bit about export as we move forward, because I think export is declining across the board. I think that's something that has really been misrepresented in news reports. You'll see here that export purchase of non-bottle rigids has dropped to 20%. For PET bottles, for example, it's dropped to less than 10%, less than 8% actually, with half of that going to Canada. For high density bottles, it's dropped to 14%, with half of that going to Canada. So you see the trend. The trend has really been that plastic exports, for the most part, there are some exceptions, has been declining, you know, for the last, well, for PET for about 10 years, for non-bottle rigid plastic since about 2014. So as export declines, I think the domestic markets really prefer a resin segregated, and you see that in the increase in 2017, the increase was, domestic increase was in segregated resins. End uses for this material are mainly relatively thick-walled injection molded products as listed here, some fraction to plastic lumber, rail ties, etc. Post-consumer film. Let's talk a little bit about films. Again, this is the 2017. This is 2017 data because the 18 is not quite available, will be. But if you look, the polyethylene clear film is the largest piece of that pie chart on the left there. Retail bags and film, which is consumer drop-off, and a few other items that you might get at that grocery store mixed into that gray section. That's another large piece of the pie. If you see where it goes, mainly back into film and sheet applications and also into lumber and decking. Those are where it goes. I mean, by that I mean the end markets to which this post-consumer resin will end up in the United States. Again, so I mentioned that export markets, we've been seeing less and less exported plastic over the years for many categories. Film would be an exception. You can see that in 2017, that orange export number dropped off, and that reduced the total volume collected and going to recycling markets in 2017. So again, it'll be interesting to see, like the non-bottle rigids, what happens with this material in 2018. I had a note, you know, from someone I hope is on the webinar right now about the materials recovery for the future project. This is a project looking at film recovery at the Mascaro Total Recycle Facility in Berks County, Pennsylvania. I'm sure many of you on the line are familiar with it. So the objective here was a multi-stakeholder project. It's still ongoing, to really look at some increasing recycling options for flexible plastic packaging and films. And so, as we all know, typically we do not suggest that films be put in a curbside bin. It just makes a mess of things, and it doesn't give you a particularly saleable product. So what you're looking at, though, in this test case, the Total Recycle Facility did ask for films. You can see I pulled this from the project website, so it's not very clear, but you can see they specifically asked for everything from drink pouches to food pouches to chip bags, etc. So they really took a stab at running this to see what would happen, and Total Recycle was chosen, is my understanding, because one of the goals of the project was to install auto sort equipment in a very modern automated MRF that already had experience with automated sortation and could adapt to adding the additional sorters and quality control for these flexible materials. So that's one of the reasons that the Total Recycle Facility was chosen. So my understanding, my colleague actually sits on this group. So I checked with her about this. She said right now they're doing some market testing on the bales that are generated. And the final report is in draft stage and is out later this month. The pie chart here is from an interim report, which is available at that URL there. And I think it is interesting to look at this pie chart because, as you can see, there's a significant amount of other materials in there, not just polypropylene. I guess that's polypropylene film. I'm sorry, polyolefin film at 61%. But you can see there's fiber at 11%. In this case, fiber is paper, unidentified, flexible films, multi-layer films, et cetera, and that. So they're market testing this material now. There are a couple markets that are looking at it and using it. This is the only MRF in the country that only tests of this sort in the United States that we're aware of. We're not aware of any globally. There could be something global, but we're not aware of any. Just wanted to mention it because it came up in a question to me prior to this webinar. So at the moment, store drop-off for consumer bags and film remains the most effective consumer collection method for film at this time. You know, a lot of film is collected post-commercially, but for consumers, it's the store drop-off for now. So that kind of gives a very brief, and all those reports I mentioned are available online if you want to dig in more, but I wanted to go through some of the recycling volumes to show that recycling volumes have trended up, that they are, the export in general is down over time. And I think it sets us up to talk a little bit about markets. So when I say markets, for the moment, I'm going to start talking about some of the things we've heard from MRFs. Now, where have we heard this? Well, we've been talking to our member companies. We've been talking to our partners in the trade organization world. For example, Recycling Partnership is an organization we talk to quite a bit. So I will caveat this in saying this is not scientific. It's just from talking to folks and getting a general feel. So I know I have MRFs and community recycling folks on the line here. So if you're experiencing something really different, we'd love to hear about it. But what we're hearing is that waste collection and recycling collection is generally considered an essential business, so it's continuing. However, there's certainly been some disruption to some recycling programs, and some MRFs have closed. A lot have not closed, but we do estimate that somewhere 5%, hopefully a little less, of total MRFs have closed due to virus concerns, often because they are smaller MRFs that really need to rely on manual sortation, or they can't socially distance appropriately. Commercial volumes, quite a bit down. We've heard 20 to 25% or more. Residential volumes, as you might imagine, are up with people sheltering in place. Some reports that these volumes are up even a bit more for things like bulky rigids. So far, we haven't had a great increase in contamination, and I hope that that's bearing out to folks that are listening here, roughly consistent with pre-virus levels. So if a program was pretty strong pre, it's still pretty strong. Programs that weren't as strong for whatever reason, saw more contamination, you know, it was pretty consistent there. We're recognizing that local budgets will be constrained here. I didn't mention that, but you know, recycling is not necessarily always able to be a community priority. We understand that, and we're hoping that doesn't result in, you know, additional slowdowns here. It's still to be determined whether deposit material is making its way into the curbside stream in any significant way. I'll talk about this more specifically in a subsequent slide, but of our 10 deposits, you know, states all also run curbside programs. We just don't know yet. We haven't seen enough information to come through yet. You know, we've heard that fiber demand is up, and Wayne and I were just talking about that, and I'm recognizing that, you know, maybe that's not borne out across the board, because I think the fiber markets are experiencing some challenges with you know, schools and offices closed, and with production of all goods down, that except for toilet paper, the fiber demand up, you know, maybe an early call. That's what we've heard some MRFs. But I'll focus on plastics because that's my area. So plastics demand a little soft, with some exceptions for natural high density polyethylene and some exceptions for PET. We'll talk about that more in a couple of moments. The COVID-19 response, I think people have really jumped on board with this from what we've heard, following CDC and state guidelines, you know, all the things that we're very familiar with now, distancing and cleaning and staggered breaks. Sick and family leave procedures being very clear, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all those things are happening as you might expect. And I have to say, at APR, you know, we are pushing for things to stay open, stay moving, stay supported by state and local governments. But I have to applaud folks for hanging in there, because I know I'm sitting here in my home office in Northern California, and a lot of folks out there are trying to keep this all going, and we applaud folks for doing that and being out there, hanging in there, keeping the plants and facilities open. I mentioned deposit program collection because that's something we've been looking at. You know, the 10 states with deposit laws are mapped there. And this is a really sort of cursory summary. There's more at the Container Recycling Institute website, the bottlebill.org website. I link there below. So I know they follow this pretty closely, but loosely speaking, the suspension of enforcement provisions requiring retailers to accept material in place in many states. I believe Michigan collection is not really under essential business, so again, some disruption here. For Maine and Oregon, they do have some standalone redemption centers, and those are still operating, so we're having some collection there. No official notice in California or Hawaii, but I can certainly attest that there are redemption center closures, reduced volumes coming in. So no question that it's impacting California. There is, I know on the CRI website, there is some discussion of saving material for future redemption, you know, once things open up again, or perhaps adding it to curbside, although there's some concern that it may be better saved for future redemption. We can't really speak to if folks are doing that and how those volumes may start to be reintegrated into the system, or if they will, we'll have to see on that one. For plastics, this mainly impacts PET, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Roughly speaking, you know, California, there's a lot of PET that comes in under the California's CRV deposit program. Somewhere around 24% of the total PET collected in the US comes out of that California program. So certainly some impacts in California. You know, the rest of the deposit states combined bring in somewhere 14–15% of the total PET, and the rest, you know, in the low 60s comes in from curbside collection. So just to give some context to these numbers. So let's just spend a few minutes on this slide. So what's happening out there? And I think this brings in some of the threads that we've just been talking about. So we see some commercial collection decrease. I think I referenced 20–25%. Again, that was an estimated based on just talking to a few MRFs out there. But we are seeing some decrease. So that will impact some of the segregated materials that come in. We consider it commercial collection post-consumer. These items have met their intended use, but they come in through our commercial collection programs often. So that would be some of the segregated high density and polypropylene material. And it would also be some of our film volumes, some of our commercial film volumes. I mentioned deposit volumes disruption mainly impacts PET. Certainly some regions are seeing some deposit impacts, for example, California. The way the material is processed, you know, in the United States, our PET reclaimers tend to be set up to process certain types of material or certain types of material mixes. So while they have flexibility in this, they also have some history and some, you know, sort of technical setups that are geared toward certain types of material mixes. So you can see some impacts because of that. Markets. So I think we're seeing some of the markets that are really impacted by durable goods slowdown. So some of the recycled markets impacted that feed into the durable goods, you know, process. So that might be pigmented HDPE, polypropylene, some of the PET markets. I mentioned one of the biggest PET markets is PET fiber. That would be carpet fiber and other related polyester fiber markets. So you can imagine that with everything stopped, those markets are going to be impacted. No question about that. And so some of you there might be seeing that impact to PET markets. Natural HDPE markets have been relatively stable. That natural HD is a flexible, high demand material. By flexible, I mean it can be colored to match brand parameters. So there's high demand there. Of course, California has the rigid plastic packaging container law, which requires content in some non-food and non-medical containers. So you also see that regulatory requirement playing into that market. Beverage brands are still striving to meet recycled content goals. Most of you are probably aware that we've seen in the last year or so some goals or commitments from beverage brands to increase their use of recycled content and increase the recyclability of their packaging. And I think for the most part, folks are still working to meet those goals. So recycled content coming back into beverage containers, I think is holding. Package demand is strong for food and some household product producers. So You know, we're all sheltering, or most of us are sheltering at home now, and we're eating a lot of meals at home. There's a high demand for food packaging, you know, to keep things untouched by many hands, and to keep things fresh. So strong demand there. So it's a good opportunity for recycled content in food packaging and non-food packaging for household product producers. But the concern, I think, is that the market is so stressed in many ways that recycled content may be a little bit off the radar for some folks. And we certainly want to, we at APR certainly want to encourage folks to keep it on the radar insofar as possible, and to stay the course, because end markets are really critical for recycled material markets. They're just absolutely critical. You don't have an end market, you know, it shuts down the system. So, and the final point there, inexpensive resin really remains a significant challenge to recycled resin markets. And this is true for some of the high density, the olefin markets, and for PET markets. So I think many of you are familiar with this concept, but basically, you know, for mechanical recyclers, you need to buy your raw material, and you need to spend money to clean it and get it to a place where it's a resin suitable for remanufacturing use. If virgin markets are too low, virgin coming in too low, that really disrupts that. You cannot make your product to be lower or competitive with virgin to a certain point. So it's kind of a looming issue with recycled resin markets, but I think it's an important one for folks to be aware of. I put this up here just for a little context, and again, I'm going to say that many of you know this landscape better than I, but I'll mention it anyway. So before the virus, there were some challenges, you know, post-China export shutdown with paper and some mixed plastics. I think we're aware of that. The financial world was sort of upside down, and this is from a public report that the Northeast Recycling Council, NERC, has put out. They looked at blended ton values in 2019. You can see them there. And they also had an average cost to sort and prep material in the little blue chart there. So you can see the average cost to sort and prep material per ton was considerably higher than the blended ton values. So obviously a problem. And so I think that a lot of the new contracts for the larger MRF organizations seek to mitigate these commodity value fluctuation, the risk inherent in these commodity value fluctuations. I think, and I think these have been widely reported in the trade journals as folks are looking at how to mitigate this. And I know there's been some investment in domestic paper mills in the country. And my understanding is that plastics provide revenue, but not a high percentage of stream by weight. So there's a problem. If you look at that the tiny chart on the left there, you can see the weighted percentage of outbound tons. And paper has traditionally been, you know, made up the bulk of the weight, with plastics now providing some value, but not providing that much weight. So just wanted to mention that because this was an issue pre-virus. I've heard that blended ton values are holding. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've heard. I hope that's the case. But I just wanted to mention this because this was all, you know, there was some flux in the marketplace post-China exit, and not sure how the virus will exacerbate or change that. I think we'll see. So I'll take a breath here. So where does APR fit into this? I'll just spend a couple of minutes here, and then I do want to give Advocate time for questions. So the APR, as I mentioned, is really trying to help small businesses. A lot of recycling businesses have traditionally been very entrepreneurial. Small businesses want to sort of see want to support these businesses insofar as we can. There is the second bullet there. There is an introduction in late November, a bill authorizing $500 million in matching fund grants for recycling infrastructure across the U.S. So that is that's out there now. It's been introduced, and I think the APR is one of many urging leaders to include that introduced bill in any infrastructure package that Congress would consider. In other words, it would support recycling infrastructure with a matching grant program and other programmatic elements. We've long felt that the recycling infrastructure really could use attention and some investment. It's not that easy to do sometimes with with the existing mechanisms in place for investment. So we would like to see this happen at the federal level as part of any infrastructure packages, as mentioned. And the APR continues to emphasize the importance of recycling infrastructure during coronavirus-related closures. So we are not a lobbying organization. We are really a technically based organization, or that's been the root of our organization. But we do have someone in California and someone in DC that helps us, an advocacy groups that help us look at what's coming down the pike in those areas. And we also have a PR agency helping us put out the good message about plastics recycling. And so we use all of those tools and all of those organizations to help us do this, help us, execute that last bullet there, and support our members as best we can at this time. I'm going to just go through a couple things that we do in case this resonates with any of you on the phone. Please, talk to us down the road. But one of the things I mentioned is, our origins as a technical organization is the APR Design Guide for Plastics Recyclability. We spend a lot of time talking to folks about how to design a recyclable package. What's a better label? What's a better way you can use your inks, et cetera, et cetera. The idea being that we want to have more good material. And if folks put good material in the bin, they get better recycled content back out the other end. And so this is something we work very hard on. The link there to the design guide is at the very bottom right there. And we do have training on this, and we do try to communicate this. And that's part of, as Wayne mentioned early on, I work a lot on potentially problematic issues with containers and work with brands to see if we can improve them. Demand champions, as I mentioned, and I think it's said well right there, consistent, reliable demand is critical for recycling to be mature, vibrant, and sustainability. We don't have end markets, we don't have anything. So, you're sorting to no end if the end markets aren't strong. And so we really encourage consistent, reliable end markets. And the Demand Champs program encourages folks to register for this program. All this program really asks that you do is use more recycled content in any product in your organization than you did the year previous. And this doesn't have to be sophisticated packaging content necessarily. It can be any content. It can be any content in your work in progress items, Gaylord's pallets. It can be in your trash and recycling bin liners. It can be anything in your organization that uses content. So again, this program has garnered a lot of attention because I think it really reminds folks that we're all in this. We're all in this, and when we ask folks to use recycled materials, everyone could look at where they might use those recycled materials and step up. And that's what we encourage with this program, the Demand Champions program. Retail grocery versus recycling, I work on this one, trying to get retail grocers to look at recycling their back of house polypropylene and high density polyethylene materials, typically frosting tubs, seafood tubs, pharmacy containers, etc. So recyclegroceryplastics.org is the dedicated website for this program. And again, looking to connect material with end markets is what we try to do, and overcome any obstacles in the process. For example, I'm looking at whether there is some design for recyclability sort of tenets we might establish and promote for pharmacy containers to make them more recyclable, looking at that. So again, please contact if any of this resonates with what you would like to do in your organization. PCR certification, this is new for us. This is a new program. It's just on the website as of about a week and a half ago. So the program here is as it mentions, APR is not going to be an endorsing organization, but we are going to certify third-party qualified companies to conduct certifications. And then a reclaimer would hire an APR endorsed company to conduct the certification, and APR would promote the program. We are not currently certifying products for content, although we've been asked a lot about that. And I think the leaders of this program, or the manager of this program at APR, are already looking at this. And we did this because we want to support and grow the use of post-consumer recycled plastics. And to do that, we understand that it's really important that a PCR certification be reliable, consistent, that's key, and accessible by both producers and users of recycled plastic resins. So we started this program. So, and I think we already have at least 2 certified third parties. I think there are a couple more in the pipeline. And we already have listings of folks that have been certified. So again, we feel like that'll help push the market forward and provide some consistency of how it's defined and assessed. And finally, I mentioned that we do have a PR agency, and I think when China pulled out of the market and when there was so much press about recycling isn't working, we felt that was just really grossly unfair and untrue. And there were many things that we're working in terms of recycling. And so I wanted to leave with this kind of parting message that plastic recycling works. We do a lot of work now to get the message out about plastic recycling. And that I mentioned, that is one more thing one more focus area for the APR is getting that message out. And so with that, I think that's about the end of my presentation, I think, but I think I've probably gone more quickly than I anticipated, so I have lots of room for questions. And please, there's my contact email. Please feel free to contact me with questions or comments after we finish with the webinar.
All right, thank you, Kate. So we're now going to field some questions. Again, if you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A feature on your control panel. We do have some questions and some messages in the chat feature, so I'm going to get to those right now. So this attendee asked, or it's actually just a comment, some other MRFs have processed plastic film over the past few years, but they've been able to sell the material recently, and this person's from he's mentioning the Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio area having issues with marketing film.
So I'm sorry, Wayne, they are able to sell this or not?
They are not.
They're not, and they're processing at a MRF
right.
At a MRF facility. Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to the nature of what they're trying to sell, but I think looking at the end markets and how film is working, we do in this country have more markets for a cleaner film, I'll be honest. And so, yeah, there is a little disconnect there. If a film is coming out of a MRF and it's very mixed and not particularly clean, it may struggle to find a market. But yeah, I wasn't aware of that. We talked about the MRF in Berks County with the trial, but I wasn't aware of others trying to do this right now. So, and I can't speak to their output. I don't want to imply that I am, but in general, it's been a challenge to run it through MRFs, as folks know.
Okay, yeah, here's 2 questions. Will we see federal mandatory recycled content laws this year? And then the second question is, with cheap virgin material, will companies keep their commitment to more recycled content?
Well, the first one, federal mandated content. There is a federal bill. It was introduced just before the virus. It has a lot of components in it. I think it does have there's a lot there, and I think it's early days for that bill. And of course, the virus has disrupted it. So I don't know where it'll go. But if anyone has more questions about it, I can't think of it's the Lowenthal. It's a partnership bill, Lowenthal and someone else at the federal level. But I could find the number if you want it. So that's out there. Don't know where it'll go, and I think it has a content provision. California has looked at a content provision for PET containers, for plastic containers, I should say, plastic beverage containers. that has sort of been wrapped up in the broader issues that they're looking at now. And so those bills are still alive. I don't know, someone just told me from our 22 billion surplus in California, we're now back in deficit. So I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going to happen with some of those, but I have a feeling that they'll be taken up again, later this year. It just may delay things a little bit in terms of content and other provision. I think the California watchers think something's going to happen in California that will probably involve content, but it hasn't happened yet. And so we're kind of watching this space. So yeah, if that person has specific questions on which bills to watch, if they can email me, I can get you the numbers on those, on that federal bill and on any California bill that's still pending. The second question about virgin resin, that's the concern, I think. And I think, we encourage folks to stay the course. And it is an issue. I wish I could say otherwise, but the cheapness of the virgin resin is an issue. So, we certainly at APR encourage folks to stay the course, that it's worth it, to stay the course, that it's the right thing to do. And in some states, there may be regulatory pressure to do so, but that's still developing.
Yeah, related comment on that. This attendee states it's reported that the major oil companies are ramping up their plastics output, given the downturn in demand for their fuels. He references a recent PBS special called Plastic Waste, which highlighted this activity, especially in Texas.
Yeah, I know the frontline episode that the participant refers to. Yeah, I don't know how connected those are. I meant to look at that more. That didn't necessarily ring that true to me, because plastics is a really small part of where fossil fuels goes in the marketplace. But I haven't looked at that closely. I will say that I felt that Dan Leaf at Resource Recycling, the publication did a very nice sort of analysis on that frontline piece. I'm happy to forward to folks. Again, that's the Resource Recycling publication, and Dan Leaf is the editor. Very nice. I would suggest reading that, because I think it was a really nice analysis of that full frontline piece. I don't know if he addresses that piece of it per se, but I think it was a good general overview and analysis.
Okay, you might have addressed this already, but question is, how might recycled content laws / policies affect end-use markets for various resins? Example, driving more recovered material to film or bags.
Yeah, certainly. And I should know this off the top of my head. I'm not the film expert at APR, but I do believe there is some content requirement for film, I believe, in California. And again, I can look at that more closely. It does drive it. The RPPC law I mentioned in California, the rigid plastic packaging container law, has driven markets for high density. Now it's not for food or food, beverage, cosmetic, or medical contact materials, but other materials. It has driven content for those materials. So absolutely, content drives end market. No question about it. I don't know did I answer that question? Was there another part of it?
No, that's it.
Okay.
This attendees mentioned the House bill, or House Resolution 5845. It's called Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2020. I don't know if that's related to the one you were talking about.
There's a couple. There's one.
Yeah.
There's a couple federal bills. One is more education oriented. Or the Break Free, and the one I mentioned, the Recover, is more infrastructure oriented, and then the Lowenthal bill is more more collection oriented, and has, I believe, has a content provision. I don't want to misspeak on these though, because I haven't really prepped for speaking about pending legislation. But I know there are two at the federal, one more education oriented and one more collection oriented. And then there's the Recover Act that I mentioned that is more infrastructure oriented. And again, I'm happy to grab the numbers on these and provide some links if anyone's interested in looking at these. I believe they're all pending. None of these have you know, have, I don't, is our legislators back in DC? I don't know if they are yet, I think in May. So everything is sort of on hold, but they have been introduced.
Okay. Just pardon me a second. I'm going through the questions here. Here's a comment and a question. State and local governments are good places to possibly regulate certain activities, such as designing for recyclability or the environment, EPR, and third-party certifications. How would you recommend such entities begin to promote plastic recycling?
Entities being which, the local?
State and local governments.
Well, I think a couple ways. I think, you know, anyone who designs packaging can certainly benefit from design for recycling principles. And if you go to our website, you'll see them. And anyone can, I think, can direct folks to good design for recycling principles. How do you create a better label? What do you stay away from? You know, don't put metal on your plastics. You know, there are just some basic things and some more nuanced things that impact design for recycling. In terms of markets, so I mentioned the Demand Champs program. If you go to our website and go to Demand Champs program, we've also started a state Demand Champs program. And that really ties in with this person's question. Again, you know, what's important? It's important to put good stuff in the marketplace. It's important to help develop and find markets for all the materials that MRFs are processing or asked to process out there. So we support both ends. We want to put good stuff in, and we want to have a place for it to go. So if you go to our Demand Champs link on the site, and there's a new the state program has just been launched, but we're looking at state Demand Champs. So if you look at manufacturers in your state that might consider incorporating recycled content, maybe into their main products that they sell, but maybe not, maybe into just the products they use in their businesses every day. Any usage is a good usage of recycled content. So we ask folks to look at that. So I think those are two ways was there a third part to that question, or did I cover it?
I believe you covered it, yeah.
Okay.
But a follow-up question, another question actually, the question was, is the state government actually eligible for the Demand Champion program?
Yeah, you know, again, yeah, absolutely. You know, anyone is really eligible for this program, I think, and the parameters of the program are pretty straightforward. We just want you to increase your content. So if you don't have much to start with, you're going to increase. So we'd like to see you keep increasing it. But anyway, you know, one thing at a time. It's a year program, so you're a demand champ for that year, but you can continue that. Liz Bedard, the program manager, she talks about a laundry facility in a small town in Texas who asked if they could be a demand champ because they had to buy some new materials and they wanted to buy recycled content materials, and we said absolutely. so I mean I jest, but not really. But I think that really if you can increase your use of recycled content, that's what we're looking for, and then you're eligible to be a demand champ. We do ask you to document it, but it's not an onerous documentation. So.
Okay, this is a specific question on PET-G. Is there a future for a market for recycling PET-G?
You know, I'm not aware of recycling markets for PET-G. So in the consumer marketplace, you don't see too much. You know, resin companies have really innovated. For example, at one point, the handle where orange juices, a lot of those were in PET-G. But resin companies really innovated and they came up with different extrusion and blow molded resins for that purpose that are compatible with the post-consumer PET stream. So, you know, really great innovation in that space. There is PETG used still in medical fields, and there is a trade group that looks specifically at medical plastics recycling. I'm not aware of that many markets for that because there are some challenges with hazards, etc. when you're talking medical waste. So it's not something that I'm familiar with. It's possible that there are a few recycled markets for PETG. We don't see them much in the post-consumer space that we work in, but it's possible if you could have a captured program, for example, at medical facilities, you could capture some of that. But I don't have any more, unfortunately, any more specifically than that.
Here's a different one. Are oxygen scavengers in plastic PET bottles a real concern?
can be, and it's something that at APR we have a work group established to look at very specifically. I mentioned that I look at problem areas, and I had something called 5 for Focus, where we identified 5 problem areas. Additives are one area we were looking at, and oxygen scavengers specifically are part of that. For those who are not familiar, oxygen scavengers help diminish, they basically scavenge oxygen, so your product stays fresher, because the oxygen can start to discolor or otherwise age your product, and if you want, and so it helps with shelf life of a product. So yeah, and it's something that we're looking at very closely, as what kind of innovations might be needed here, how, what other, if we can't get perfect right now, how might we look at this and get something that would be better, so we're looking at that right now in APR. So when I say work group, it's a peer group of APR members who volunteer to look at something more closely, and set up some work products and an agenda to work through, and then come back to the broader technical groups at APR and make recommendations, hopefully for either further guidance or for further work to be done in these areas. Yeah.
Okay, here's some two positive comments on plastics recycling. First one is, plastic bottle recycling has been an important part of our company's curbside and drop-off programs for years. I think there's been so much focus on trying to recycle what appears to be non-recyclable plastics in the last couple of years that we forgot how stable the plastic bottle market has been. For a 3-month period, natural HDPE prices have exceeded aluminum can prices, and this is a good story about plastics bottle recycling. And then
Yeah.
and then the second is this is Emmett County. I'm not sure which. I think it's Virginia. Our end market for post-consumer plastic bags and film, high density polyethylene / LDPE, is Trex, which is the plastic lumber facility in Winchester, Virginia. They just sent another full load out yesterday. Prices remain stable and consistent for the past 2 years. We say this because we're dual stream and focus on building relationships with the end markets. In this true circular economy, we are feedstock producers and manufacturers. For manufacturers, we educate our public to their specs. Consistency and transparency is a key value in these partnerships. So
yep.
That's.
Yeah, both of those comments are music to our ears, I'll tell you, at APR. Yeah, exactly. We mentioned that we had contract with the PR agency after a lot of bad press. There's so many good stories to tell. I mean, sure, we would like to see our recycling rate a little higher, and, we would like to see some infrastructure, but that's just natural. You want to sort of see, the development of your industry, and you have to keep it moving forward, right? But there's so many positive stories. And again, I refer to that front line, the PBS front line. I think that they didn't tell those stories as well as they could. And I would agree with that first commenter that yes, we've seen the bottle market really grow. We've seen stable markets. We've seen some strong HD markets. And the second comment, yes, totally agreed. And someone asked earlier, do virgin prices affect people's propensity to use recycled? And I would say, there are long-standing relationships in this industry, and I think people do their best to get their suppliers a clean stream of good material. I think we really encourage those relationships. We applaud them, and I think we need them. We need them to keep this recycling infrastructure strong and vibrant, and to move it forward. No question about it. So thank you for those 2 comments.
Okay. This goes back to the recycled content questions and answers. There's a confirmation that California's SB 270 requires 40% post-consumer resin for plastic bags marketed as reusable, and then there's a 10% PCR requirement for plastic trash bags.
Thank you, person who's closer to that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Jenny Romer from the Plastics Bag Recycling Organization.
Great.
Okay, this one is pretty long. If I heard correctly, you mentioned PCR supply for manufacturing might be constrained in the near term. Given the amount of time it takes to move the value chain / procurement process iceberg, government specifically, do you have a recommendation for structuring the process to encourage this shift as a goal? We've been considering 5% PCR resident in all plastic bags in our state, similar to California and other states. We want to make sure we are maximizing these steps and supporting what's happening.
Right. So I think if I can break that question out, I think what I mentioned was with, you know, with so many companies not able to run or running it very, you know, very slowly, you know, construction down, trade shows, you know, not happening. I think that's what I meant, that we're seeing. And so that may reduce need for durable goods, whether it be pipe or whether it be, you know, trade show carpeting. So, you know, we're seeing that just natural reduction in the marketplace. So if recycled materials are going into those markets, we might see some impact. I think, you know, we certainly will, and hopefully only short term. The second part of that, can states use different you know, policy levers, I think, like a content lever to help with their markets? Absolutely. And I think, you know, if states consider that, do their due diligence on how that might happen, talk to their suppliers in the state, you know, do the homework on that, or you know, certainly reach out for any assistance that we can provide on that, or any guidance we can provide, direction. But absolutely, I think that helps, as does, you know, trying to establish good end markets, as I mentioned with the demand champs, good end market outlets for materials. Both of those things work. Now, sometimes it's tough if a state doesn't have a reclamation facility for that resin in that state, and you want to keep everything in state. I will acknowledge that can be challenging. You want to keep everything in the state. You want your collection to go to a processor, to go to end markets in the state, and sometimes you have to leave the state and come back in the state, and that gets a little tricky. But those things aside, I think state initiatives, you know, are a fantastic way to sort of support the markets.
Okay, all right. I think we're just about out of time, so I think we're going to wrap up here. You know, you have Kate's contact information there, so any follow-up you can do with her. So this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded and will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. I'm going to try and get this one up on YouTube as soon as possible, because I think it's a good resource. And, you know, last month's webinar on metals markets is up on our website now, and thank you again for joining us. We hope you'll join us for next month's webinar, which is paper markets. And please visit the NRC and RMC websites for schedule updates. And thank you again, Kate, for taking the time out to make this presentation. And have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
All right, so long.
Bye.
Stay safe. Stay safe.